Welcome everyone to Fridays with CMEA, our Sip and Share event. This is the final Sip and Share event for May. And today we are so lucky that we have Dr. Evan Tobias with us. Next slide, please. We're looking at reimagining or imagining post-pandemic futures for music programs. And today, again, as I said, Evan Tobias is with us from Arizona State University. Before we get to his fantastic information and thoughtful, innovative ideas, we are going to do a few slides that we've received from NAFME and connect you to those. Next, please. Just so you know, this webinar is being recorded and archived. You'll be able to find it on the CASMEC website. Plus, today we are Facebook Live, so give your best smile out and wave out to the world. Just so you know, we maintain during this time of unprecedented need for virtual and online instructional materials, the first consideration for use is it must be student safe. To that end, NAFME recommends that children under the age of 13 have permission and that families do not provide any identifying information for access to these resources. Next, please. NAFME advocates for equitable access to instruction. As we curate materials to help members implement online learning, we recognize an effective online instruction in any subject matter requires universal access, professional learning opportunities and time, opportunities for students to learn and to know and succeed online instruction, and an appropriate learning management system. Next. Many resources are out there. I'm sure you've been hit by them all, and they are fantastic for you to choose from. If you have any questions, you can go to nafme.org or calmusiced.com. We have weekly updates on there on COVID-19, letters we've written, etc., that you can access. And next, please. Just so you know, we have been doing a great deal of work for you at the state level, and now I'm handing this off to our president, Armelin De La O.
Hello, and welcome again to our Friday Sip and Share. We're excited that you're joining us this evening. So CMEA has been working tirelessly to support music educators and students over this last few months. We have weekly morning advocacy and information calls with our lobbyists every Tuesday. We've composed many letters, not only to our governor, but to many of our legislators, as well as regarding budget and budget cuts and equity among educational funding, and then letters to all decision makers as it relates to county offices, principals, board members. And so all of those letters are there at our Cal Music Ed site so that you can access them if you want to see what we've been doing in relationship to advocacy. Slide change. Many of you may have seen the opportunity to give input to the Roadmap to Recovery on the governor's website. So if you haven't, I'm not sure that it's still up, but it could be. I think last week I saw that it was still there. We are also still supporting and working for the $200 billion for educational funding. We are in the midst of providing language for the cleanup bill, AB 1850, for the independent consultants for AB 5. And just in terms of other opportunities that we've had, we were able to submit our resumes to be on a couple of task force. We didn't get on the task force, but we are continuing to provide input on different opportunities, different websites to make sure that we're talking about music education to our decision makers. We created a virtual solo festival with over 300 entrants, and we're almost at the end of that. They've been adjudicated, and those scores or that information is going back to our students. So it was an exciting time. Many of you have been here on our Fridays with our Sip and Shares, and these again are all posted on the CASMEC site. So we're excited. We recently crafted a CMEA statement about social emotional learning. Again, that is on our State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurman's website. And so it's a Facebook wiki. And so if you haven't had a chance to check that out, I think the link is on our website. And you can actually go in and join that and add to that. And again, we're continuing to give verbal feedback and written feedback regarding the AB5 independent consultants. Next slide. So if you haven't been following us, please do so on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, our website on Fridays. So we're excited, and I'm going to turn it over to our guest because he's here with us. Great.
Awesome.
Welcome, Evan.
So today I would like to introduce Dr. Evan Tobias. He is an associate professor of music education at Arizona State University, where he teaches undergraduate and graduate courses and heads the Consortium for Innovation and Transformation in Music Education. I'll put that link in the chat at some point today. He is also director of arts work, the Kax Herberger Center for Children in the Arts. Prior to his appointment at ASU, Tobias taught a technology and music education course at DePaul University and middle school instrumental and general music in New York. I could write and send a book on all of his background and the greatness of what he does, but I want you to experience it firsthand. So here is Dr. Evan Tobias. Welcome to CMEA. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much. I want to first thank the CMEA board for inviting me, and also to say, I know all of you members know this, but what an amazing group of leaders and forward-thinking leaders in a time where we really need forward-thinking leaders. So kudos to all of you for choosing a great board here. And I was just telling them how impressed I am of the breadth and depth of these different kinds of sessions that you've had. So thank you for having me, and I'm glad to spend some time with you. I always like to start any kind of online session, even in-person session, with a quick check-in. So we're going to do some breakout groups today. So this will be our first practice of our breakout groups. We'll spend just about 3 minutes so that you have a chance for each person in the breakout group to share whatever you are comfortable sharing. But as a couple of prompts, perhaps you can share with each other, obviously who you are and where you are, but also the way that you would finish these statements of I hope, I fear, I wonder, and I imagine. So let's take, again, like 3 minutes to do breakout groups, about 3 people per group, and we'll come right back in and start our conversation together. As we're coming back from our breakout groups, perhaps some of you, like in my group, might have been cut off right in the middle of the conversation. So it happens, but hopefully you had a chance to share out a little bit about some of your hopes, some of your fears, wonderments that you have, and maybe what you're imagining, and got to know each other a little bit more. I do want to share, I'm going to put this up. I did want to share before we move on for the rest of our time together. I've been trying to think through how we might respond to some of the current events that are taking place, and some of the tensions and violence that's being enacted towards people right now. And I wanted to share, rather than try to articulate my own thoughts, I wanted to amplify some of the thoughts and words of Daniel Bernard Romain. He's a colleague of mine at ASU, a great violinist and composer. And he recently wrote a declaration and affirmation of love for Black people. And just wanted to share this with everyone and have some time to reflect on it. He writes, we as a dedicated group of artists, arts organizations, and places of education and learning declare without reservation or restraint that the presumed innocence of Black people, and specifically Black men and boys, in recurring encounters with errant law enforcement officers has disproportionately led to a presumed guilt and summary, inhumane responses centered on fear, detainment, arrest, removal, or a growing repetitive practice of unlawful and unnecessary deaths. We acknowledge America's historical propensity towards harm, injustice, and exclusion. We also witness America's extraordinary capacity to heal, be just, include, and embrace. We know that law enforcement is tasked with the difficult work of policing our communities as they uphold the law and their solemn oath to protect and serve. And we are aware and reminded of the distance and divides we face between our politics, as well as the constant struggle we face in finding agreement on what we most value. However, as artists, educators, and learners, we are clear and committed to the sanctity of life, the promise of liberty, and the most fundamental and absolute right to personal safety, regardless of race and gender. Therefore, we proudly and boldly affirm our commitment to Black people as a vital part of our American identity and families, and implore all of us to see in them your father, mother, brother, sister, and your child, all living within one spirit of one nation, engaged in a shared, everlasting pursuit of happiness and love. And again, those are the words of Dr. Daniel Bernard Romain.
Beautiful.
And thank you for sharing that space to listen to his words and reflect on them. what does this session have to do with where we are right now in terms of imagining futures and in terms of thinking through where we are in this moment in U.S. history and also of education? And I think in various social media groups and various conversations, I think we often hear this idea of an interest in going back to normal and going back to the way that things were, how they were. And I think we might share some time today to reflect on how normal normal in many cases is problematic, and often the status quo is not enough. So as we're thinking through where we are now and where we might be going, it's really important to imagine other kinds of possibilities. And I think, as Maxine Green likes to talk about or has shared in her writing, the idea of thinking about how things might be otherwise, how things could be and how things should be. So this is a time where we can at least bracket off our time together for 50 minutes today to pause for a moment and reflect on how things might be. So I wanted to share, I believe in the power of stories. I wanted to share a very brief short story with you, and I'll explain why I'm sharing the story on the other end of it. And this is an excerpt. The concert hall had amazing acoustics. Chris looked around at the stage, at the other choir members, squinted at the brightness of the lights, and glanced at the chairs. A month or so ago, Alex F. posted a note in the community space about how changing the type of fabric on the chairs throughout the hall impacted the choir. Alex was more interested in interior design than acoustics and had made the discovery after playing around with fabric swatches for the front row. A couple of choir members actually experimented singing in a smaller group with different fabric options in an after-hours session a couple of weeks ago. Geeky but fun, Chris thought. The conductor signaled for warm-ups to begin and shared the set of repertoire and issues to adjust for the day. Chris paused and took a breath. It was the breath. Chris missed the breath, sometimes audible, sometimes felt. You just don't feel the breath in this, Chris thought. Everyone was around. You could see their faces, hear their voices. You could see the conductor from any angle. Sometimes Chris liked to experience the ensemble from way up above, looking down at people's heads. If they were singing outside in cold weather, would you see a breath? Not sure if there's an algorithm for that yet, Chris thought. What is outside or inside anyway in a digitally mediated choir? While the conductor worked with a small group, Chris played around with the mix, at one point listening in on a conversation from some sopranos who forgot to mute their sets. Chris mostly liked to alternate between the entire choir and people who knew their parts really well, regardless of whether they were in the same section. It still amazed Chris that they could listen to any combination or volume level of the 60 choir members. But no matter how Chris adjusted the mix, Chris never felt the other choral members' breath. Sometimes in this choir, Chris felt alone. Now, the reason I chose to share this story, which is it's a fictional story, is not because I wanted to think through what a digital choir would be. It was because I wrote this a little over 2 years ago, back in March of 2018, trying to think through what might it be like if we were at a point where we would be physically distanced from one another and not teaching in the same place at the same time. And at the time when I was thinking that, I thought of this as what we would consider like a far future. I wasn't anticipating or predicting that we would be there, be in this kind of space in 2020. And I also acknowledge that we're not at a place right now where 60 people can sing in a choir live in any kind of real or tangible way. And that's really not the point. The point was thinking through all the issues that are involved of if this were a reality back 2 years ago. And to that point, I think, so here we are now. And if you've never heard of the book Future Shock, this was written by Alvin Toffler. And in the book Future Shock, it's really interesting because he writes about what he sees as this sort of growing fast rate of change. And he passed away in 2016. And at that time, Farhad Manjoo wrote this article about him and his work in the New York Times. And Manjoo wrote that in Mr. Koffler's coinage, future shock wasn't simply a metaphor for our difficulties in dealing with new things. It was a real psychological malady. And he refers to this dizzying disorientation brought on by the premature arrival of the future. And in that book, Toffler says, change is avalanching upon our heads, and most people are grotesquely unprepared to cope with it. And what I find interesting is I think that for the most part, when you talk to people in the field, most people were not anticipating a pandemic, and most people were not anticipating doing teaching the way that we are currently doing teaching now. Now, that being said, I think all of us are impressed, are just kind of blown away by the resilience that we have as a field, that all of us have, that young people have. Not everyone is doing as well as they could be or ought to be. But for something that hit us so quickly, so hard, we've been doing a really wonderful job. And we've seen the blooming of solutions everywhere: webinars, resources, Facebook pages dedicated specifically for online and distance teaching, nonprofit organizations sharing resources. I mean, the amount of effort going into responding has been really fabulous. But the fact remains that for the most part, we were caught off guard as a field. We encountered future shock in a way. The future came crashing upon us. And so in these times when we're responding, what we tend to see are reactions, solutions, and then as we're getting towards the end of the school year, we're starting to see predictions of what might be during the summer and what might be during the fall. And these are all things that need to occur, but they're not the only ways to engage in what might be our futures. So I think for another way to engage, this is not to discount in any way having reaction, solutions, and predictions. We need those. But to expand from these reaction, solutions, and predictions to get into a headspace and a way of being where we could think through imagination, futures thinking, and curricular inquiry. And so I want to make the case that one way of avoiding future shock is to think through the future, to engage in what some people call it futurism. I'm a little uncomfortable with that title, but we might call future studies or futures thinking. And I think what's interesting is in Future Shock, Toffler writes, in dealing with the future, it is more important to be imaginative and insightful than to be 100% right. And if you look at any of the work of people, there are people who consider themselves professional futurists, and you can actually go to school for futures thinking and forecasting. And one thing that's consistent across the board for all of these different people who do this kind of work is that they make very explicit, we are not trying to predict the future. We're trying to anticipate or speculate future possibilities. And I think that's a really interesting headspace to be in as a field. So to explore the potential of linking imagination, futures thinking, and curricular inquiry, I'm hoping together today we can engage in some approaches and some context to explore this, and then take away from this some ways of engaging as music educators, as in thinking about futures thinking for our field to imagine possible futures, so that it's not only to prepare for the next thing, because there's always going to be things, but to be able to develop that capacity so that we are engaging as futures thinking and future possibilities in music education. So again, I'm going to share another story. This is going to be another a short excerpt. And I want to set this up because I originally wrote this with a much more, because we don't have as much time together today, I'm cutting off the beginning of this story. So I want to set it up for you a little bit. This story, you learn from the beginning of it that it takes place somewhere most likely in the Southwest at a time where there's extreme heat. One of the main characters is Sam Trainer, who is a band director of a highly successful program that's known across the state for their marching band program and for winning a lot of festivals and for just really high quality performance coming from their program. And so Sam Trainer learns from his district that the heat is so extreme that we need to cancel marching band. So the way the story starts is it's taking you through Sam's getting up in the morning, and he's about to go to the school to give the announcement to the young people and their parents that unfortunately this year we're going to have to cancel marching band. So that's, I'm going to leave you off. I'm going to lead you from the part of the story where he has just made this announcement. And then this will all make sense in a little bit of why I'm sharing this. The first few months were difficult. Several students wrote letters to the, let me pause. Nina Peneta is a protagonist in the story. Nina was going to be the drum major this year. She was completely stoked to be the drum major. She's considered a fabulous student. She's on everyone's radar as someone who's going to be a future leader. She is a leader right now. And I think more so than Sam, she's the protagonist in the story. Not that Sam's a bad person, but Nina is the protagonist. The first few months were difficult. Several students wrote letters to the Board of Education, but most took the end of the marching band in stride as yet another change to high school life. The band members wanted to do something musical together, but just couldn't figure out what to do. Sam encouraged students to play in chamber groups, and some did. A small group tried to create their own marching band show that they could perform indoors a la WGI and Winter Drumline, but it never caught on with their peers or community, and they often fought over control of decisions. Most delved into the music library, playing through pieces that they liked. Sam tried to support each student group, but just couldn't reconcile their annoyance at one group that spent hours on laptops and mobile devices. On one day, Sam twisted their back, ducking as one of the students' drones swooped down by the band room door before jetting off in a rotating formation with around 50 other plastic discs that Sam thought looked like flying robot vacuums with small but loud speakers on their wings. The group teamed up with peers across the school, and with the help of a science teacher, partnered with a local university and business that provided a set of drones, electrical components, and support for their programming of the drone band. "You're not even playing the music," Sam quipped once, but still let the group use the band room and other spaces around the music program and would answer their questions about balance, orchestration, and timing. Sam would nod cordially to the corporate folks who volunteered at the school, helping the students program multidimensional movement to music and how to account dynamically for the wind's speed and direction. Sam just didn't get the attraction to typing or looking at lines of code. Sure, they got the drones to move and form interesting shapes to music. "It all seems pretty disembodied and unmusical," Sam mentioned to a colleague. "Drones," Sam huffed. It ate them up inside just a little bit that the student-adult team earned so much attention from the local media and accolades from their peers in administration. Sam reached peak frustration when fielding concerned messages from peers at other districts. "No, we're not promoting a drone band in place of the marching band," Sam told one peer. "Yes, students are still playing live music here," they told another. "No, I'm not pushing an agenda or trying to have drones included in the competition circuit," they said exasperatedly to a state band association's board member. But regardless of what other music teachers thought about the sad decline of Hidden Choya's once exemplary program, the students were moving their projects forward, and Sam would even say thriving. Sam was most surprised by Nina. They were confident in her leadership, but Sam thought for sure that Nina would have been deflated by not having the opportunity to be the drum leader that she had been working towards for the years. She was upset at first, and when Nina almost immediately announced with ferocious passion that she was going to do something and make a difference, Sam thought that Nina meant she was going to lobby administrators or the Board of Ed to allow the marching band to continue, maybe to give it one more year. That's what I would have done, Sam had thought to himself. But Nina pursued a different path, organizing a group of students to design ways they could use music to make a difference in terms of climate change. When first hearing the group discuss the Anthropocene, Sam assumed it was a video game or one of the electronic dance neo-jazz producer groups that students liked. Nina was fed up relying on the supposed adults in charge to address issues of climate change, drought, and food or water scarcity. She and her friends already lived with rolling blackouts, but the end of the marching band was the first time that something she really loved and cared about had been directly impacted by climate change in a more personal way. Nina wasn't satisfied being angry. She wanted to do something and knew that letters to the editor or presentations to local politicians wouldn't do much. Though Nina and the community loved marching band, she understood that people wouldn't all of a sudden change their ways or pass policies requiring sustainable energy because some nice high school kids no longer have the opportunity to march around outside in 130-degree heat. "Trainer, can you help us with our project?" Nina asked. "What do you need? I'm not sure what to tell you. It feels a little too political for me, and you're trying to do something with music that our country's leaders aren't even able to get done," they replied. "Well, that's sort of the point, to see if we can do with music what people haven't been able to do with other approaches," Nina said. Sam thought for a moment. "Maybe speak with Dr. Young, they might have some ideas. Do you have anything for me to listen to yet?" Nina and Sam were both frustrated. Sam helped as they could, but mainly immersed himself in having the ensemble sound amazing. They had a program to maintain, and Sam was not about to let the loss of the marching band program impact how people thought of Hidden Choya High's music program. Taking a positive outlook, Sam saw additional time to hone the ensemble's artistry and step up the complexity of the music in the symphonic wind program. They folded the marching band budget into the wind band program, purchased new music, and commissioned a piece from a popular composer. Sam wanted to support Nina and her group. The group's project included music, but just didn't seem to fit in the music program, Sam thought. But Sam dedicated themselves to the students. Plus, after hearing Nina's impassioned conversations with her friends, Sam thought she had a point. If things were like this now, what would they be like when Sam's kids, Midge and Michael, were high school age? What kind of world would they grow up into? While Sam would have moments feeling that they should do something, Sam could not get past what music or being a music teacher had anything to do with this. We're not going to save the world, one of Sam's band colleagues offered. We can give students a great experience. We can help them focus and build skills. We can help them become great musicians. But let's not pretend that playing Hulk, Granger, or some programmatic Save the Planet piece is going to help us lower the Earth's temperature by 10 degrees. We're music teachers. Sam nodded along. But what if we could do something, they thought, as their eyes swept the contour of trophies around the band room. What if we gave as much attention to figuring out if or how music could move the dial on climate change as we do rehearsing that one passage to perfection, inching up yet one more point? So this is an excerpt of fiction, and specifically this is speculative fiction, and it's a work in progress of a part of a larger project that I'm working on of how we might combine imagination, speculative fiction, speculative futures, and curricular inquiry to imagine possibilities. When we think about futures and futures thinking, there are three sort of main kinds of ways of thinking about future. There's possible futures, plausible futures, and preferable futures. And so in thinking about what is possible, what is plausible and preferable, it really opens up opportunities, not only to think about our own values and our own ways of thinking about music education, but also to sort of anticipate and to think through issues that might arise. So in this case, as I was beginning to write through this story, I actually took a cli-fi writing workshop to kind of work through this and to think through like, what are the possible futures of music education if this were to occur? But it raises a lot of interesting questions. So for us, we might think about this scenario or similar scenarios as possible futures for music learning and teaching. Where I want to turn it over to all of you is to think through, when you think about this situation and what was occurring at Hidden Choya High, is it a plausible future? If so, how plausible is it? If it's not plausible, why or why not? Is it a preferable future? Why or why not? And then what possible connections might this possible future have to our current situation and possible futures in your own programs? Now, that was a lot to ask of you to think through in a breakout group. So what I've done, I'm going to put this in a chat group, is I have a Google Doc here that's everyone should be able to access it. And I'm going to put it into the chat in a moment. And when we do the breakout groups, if you can't remember the questions or you want to have a reference point, if you have the ability to toggle between different windows, you can open up the Google Doc and it'll give you access. So I'll try to get that into the chat group here as soon as I can do that. And let's put everyone into breakout groups, and let's take about 4 minutes or so to think through these issues and to have some conversation again about how plausible, how preferable, and possible connections, and see where the conversation goes. There is no right or wrong answer to this. I think that's probably pretty clear, but I just wanted to make that statement that whether it is plausible or preferable is really up to each individual and their context. But as we're thinking through this, there are also some curricular themes that were embedded within the story itself. And before I tease these out, I'm going to give us an opportunity to go back into breakout rooms. This is going to be a little bit shorter. This is going to be only about 2 or 3 minutes just to get some kind of lightning round conversations. But go ahead and in your next breakout group, try to identify either 1 or 2 of these curricular themes that you encountered and that are either compelling or troubling to you. And then after you identify those themes, think through how plausible or preferable are these themes or not in relationship to your own programs, both currently and for the future. Again, 1 or 2 curricular themes that you found compelling or troubling within this story, and how plausible or preferable they might be for your programs now and as you're thinking about possible futures. So let's get back into breakout groups. Let's say 2 minutes, so this will be pretty quick. So what we've been experiencing so far, in addition to all the conversation that's going through, is an actual strategy for futures thinking. The idea of reading, engaging with speculative futures is one way to think through issues that are not just complex, but also tied up in all different kinds of time frames. but thinking about the future by reading people's futures and listening to people's futures, but also by writing futures. So I actually would encourage, if people are like, would you think that it would be worth spending time to write possible future stories for our programs? I would say absolutely. And then exchange them with your colleagues and talk about them. That would be wonderful. And I think another strategy is to we're not going to do this now just for the sake of time, but to think through what questions would you like to ask the people in the story. So if you could have a conversation with the characters, what would you ask Nina Pineda? What would you ask Sam Trainer? What would you ask the unnamed tuba student who's not in it? What would you ask the general music colleague or the choral colleague who are not in the story? Because what this does is it allows us to shift our perceptions and our perspectives to different frames and different stakeholders. So I think that's important as well. So when we think about possible futures, one of the themes that's been coming up, people thinking through like the idea that that COVID-19 may continue, we might get a second wave, and how might we work through that? And that certainly is a possible futures. But I also wanted us to entertain a couple of other prompts. So we're not going to work through these right now, but just as if you needed some prompts to think through, like, okay, what are some situations we might investigate, explore? We could think through what might music learning and teaching be if there was no electricity? And how do we begin to reconcile that? What does that even mean? Again, this is not just to prepare for like a time where there might not be electricity, but working through that would open up a whole headspace to be creative and to think imaginatively about how we engage as music educators. What would music learning and teaching be if we can get to a point in our society where we could say, like, you know, we've reached a point of equity. Whiteness is decentered in our society, and whiteness is decentered in our curriculum, in our schools, and in our programs. What would that be like in terms of music learning and teaching? And what would those stories be? And how, and what would happen? And what do we need to occur for that to be a reality, for that to be a possible future, a preferable future? What would a possible future be if most work was accomplished by machines in society, and also in our schools? What does that mean for us? And then what would a music learning and teaching future be like if youth were involved in all decisions and policies? And not just after the fact, but as part of the decision-making process. What would that be like? And so you can come up with your own additional prompts, but the idea here is that if we can think through these futures way before they happen, it allows us a way to think through lots of issues that are not just for the future, but also can inform what we're doing right now and what we might be doing in the near future. The other thing I wanted to have us think through is, okay, once we have these stories, what are some tools and strategies that we could use to kind of work with them? And so I wanted to open up a couple of lines of curricular inquiry that we could think through. For these, we're not going to do breakout groups, but I would encourage you to kind of either use the chat room or just think about your own responses of, in your current situation, who makes curricular decisions? And I'm talking about at all levels and all scales. And in your possible futures of your music programs, who do you think should be making curricular decisions? And what does that mean for us? And so we could have a whole discussion of what would this be like in terms of reconceptualizing our curriculum when we think about who are the people who are making the decisions. What I find interesting is in the story that I shared, some of the decisions were being made by this sort of unnamed group of people who made decisions, and Sam Trainer had to abide by them. And then other decisions were being made by Sam, and then other decisions were being made by the students in the program. Like they were determining the curriculum through their own engagement, which is, I find that interesting. I think it's a possible future, maybe even a preferable future that we could think about. What are the aims and goals of the music program? And also, what are the aims and goals of the students, of the music educators, of our communities? And think about, can you articulate those right now in terms of your current programs? And what might those aims and goals be like in your future programs? If you were to reconceptualize them, if you were to say, okay, these are the ones that no matter what, we can't move away from these aims and goals, but maybe there could be other kinds of aims and goals. And how might your program shift when you have other kinds of aims and goals? And when you think back to Sam Trainer's program, it was very clear the aims and goals were about high quality performance and technique and helping students make excellent music and helping them develop as excellent musicians. But there might not have been other aims and goals. He wasn't thinking, for instance, or they weren't thinking of how might this music program be designed in a way such that whatever students are doing is going to contribute to a better society. That wasn't necessarily on the radar as an aim and goal of the program. But what if that was an aim and goal? And what could that be like? How are music programs structured? This is actually one of my favorite ones because this is so tricky for us. When you think about your own programs, how have they been structured either for you or by you? And how might they be structured in the future? Think about what we're experiencing now and think about how we've pivoted and we've been very flexible, and in some ways maybe not so much, in restructuring our programs. What happens when we go back? Do we snap back to those pre-structured programs? Do we think about other kinds of structures? Sam Trainer's program was structured in a pretty compartmentalized manner. There was the different kinds of bands, there were marching bands, maybe there was general music. It was all sort of stranded out. When they experienced this other kind of possibility, the formation of that structure became something different. And I think there's something interesting in thinking about structures and blurred boundaries that might be useful for us. But think about your own structures and your own programs. This also could be a point where people sometimes get stuck in a rut of like, well, I can't imagine how this thing could be other. But if you kind of poke at that structure, it sometimes allows some new possibilities of what a program could be. What constitutes music and musical engagement? This again is another huge one because a lot of times it's assumed in our programs. So if you think about in our program right now, this is what constitutes music and music engagement. Here are some things that might be excluded or we're not even thinking about. In Sam's program, drone band creation was not part of the original music program. Creating music with code and programming how the drones fly around was not part of the program, but it became part of the program. So when you think about what is included and excluded in your programs, it really allows a sense of possibilities and what constitutes success. For him, it was for Sam, it was trophies. It might have been festival scores. What is success in your current program? What might success be? So here are these different kinds of lines of curricular inquiry that I think when you begin to poke at these and think through them, it allows a lot of space to reconceptualize what's happening and what might be happening in the future. So we can go back to this. We can take our music programs and move them forward no matter what the possible futures are. That is a reality that a lot of people might engage in. I would encourage us to think about how might our music program move into a possible future, whatever that possible future might be, and then how might that inform what the music program is right now and in the near future. And I think that's where there's a lot of richness of possibilities in terms of what could this be like, and then how does that inform, whether it's utopian or dystopian, whatever those possible futures are, however preferable or plausible they are. Just the act of engaging and thinking about a possible future can really open some possibilities of what our program is. And I think I'll end my part right now to, if we have time for conversation, to get some perspectives and thoughts of yours.
Thank you, Evan. Absolutely profound. And with the space and time to interact with everyone, very grateful for that. Some beautiful thoughts in the chat. For example, Jimmy Loomis is saying many programs have been running the same way for the last 40, 50 years. There's pain involved in reinventing what we had. I think acknowledging that. What are your thoughts about that?
I think, yeah, of course. I think we have to acknowledge that our identities are often very tied up in our programs, and we've invested so much in the programs, and all for the right reasons. So when we begin to think about how might we reconceptualize, we're not just reconceptualizing a program, we are reconceptualizing ourselves, our embodied selves, and the students and the community as part of that. So I think, for instance, if someone is experiencing maybe grief is too powerful a word, but they are experiencing a sense of trauma by completely reconceptualizing a program in a way where what they valued so much is devalued in order to make space for what the community and what students value, and it looks very different. I think we need to talk through that and work through that individually and collectively. So I think that is I think that's really important.
Yeah. And one more comment before we come to a closer. Ms. Bias said that we need to be able to adapt, because if we are not flexible in our thinking, we could end up depriving people of having a musical experience, regardless of what that experience might be, because we maybe hold them back in that fixed mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to give the example sometimes of a pool. And when you think about what a pool is, just think for a moment, what comes to mind when you think about a pool? And out here in Mesa, Arizona, there is an organization called Garden Pools. And what they do is they go around to pools that are empty, that have no water in them, and they reconfigure these pools to be sort of closed, sustainable ecosystems where you can grow gardens and have like a koi pond, and everything is self-sustaining. And so it reconceptualizes your way of thinking about what a pool might be. And so I think sometimes we experience functional fixedness of like a pool is a thing where you have water in it and you can swim, where you don't think about a pool as a thing where you can grow a garden and have goats and have koi. And I think we can do the same thing with our programs. The program is what it is. A band is a band, and a general music class is a general music class. And because we've been so successful with these things, that they have a fixedness to us. And perhaps imagining future possibilities can get us out of that functional fixedness into other ways of being to provide those kinds of rich musical experiences beyond what we do.
My gosh, the nimbleness and agility of all of that, right? That's beautiful. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are coming down to the last minute with Sip and Share with CMEA, part of the CASMEC webinars, daily webinars for last month. I am very grateful for Dr. Evan Tobias from Arizona State University to join us and share his thoughts and keep us thinking on a Friday afternoon. I hope your mind is abuzz with possibilities for this coming summer with this session. This session will also be hosted on the CASMEC website, so you can come back and revisit it and keep your colleagues thinking as well. What a great process to take some of your departments through, or your grade levels through as well, to just share these thoughts. Thank you so much, everyone. It was a pleasure having you here today. Thank you, Evan.
Thank you.
Thank you.